5:30, so I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. TJ is not here. Do you mind doing roll call, Tracy?
Mrs. Hudson?
Present.
Mrs. Davis?
Present.
Thank you. And that brings us to item 2 on our agenda, which is review of Board Policy 5223, release time for religious instruction. Kelly, I know we've had a number of speakers who have attended our board meeting during the public comment section. And as a result of that, with the both of us being on the policy committee, we felt like it was, I'm just stating this for public purposes, it was appropriate for the two of us as the members of the policy committee to come together and determine whether or not we had any kind of recommendation for our peers on the board as a whole as to whether or not any changes should be made with regards to policy 5223.
Correct.
I'm glad to start with some insights. I'm glad to start wherever. I don't have a set agenda. I mean, essentially, it's just the two of us. And I shouldn't say that, Dr. Bowers. It's the three of us. You were kind enough to share with us some of your thoughts on the matter. Any thoughts on where we should dive in?
Are you asking Dr. Bowers or are you asking me?
I'm asking you. Sorry, Kelly.
It's okay.
Yeah, you're fine.
I mean, as I shared with you, I do think the purpose of the policy committee is to, like what you mentioned, we've had community members approach us. And so I do think it's our responsibility to then look at the policy to say, is this appropriate for our district? Are there any changes that need to be made? Does it need to be stayed as is? And so I think that information gathering is helpful. So information from Dr. Bowers was good. I do think that it would be good to have insight to the full board about what's going on in the state of Ohio and other districts, and just have a discussion about next steps, if there are any.
Meaning that you feel it's appropriate for the two of us as members of the policy committee to tee it up to the full board as let's have a more thorough board-wide discussion as to what's transpiring, what has transpired here within our community with regards to comments that have been made thus far, what's transpiring or at least potentially at issue during lame duck session, with our state legislature, and how that may or may not impact what is right for our district going forward. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Anything in particular that there are a few things that I had noted that I want to bring up for that broader discussion, and would just want to note if there's anything in particular that you would want to as well. One of the issues for me personally is whether or not curriculum is shared with the district. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to get clarity on. From you, Dr. Bowers, is it true that the curriculum is not shared with the district? Is that accurate at this point? I know there have been some things that have been in flux. And so I want to ensure that when we take this to the board as the entire board, that we're bringing forward the most accurate, up-to-date information.
Yeah, so I don't think we ever asked for the curriculum. So in fairness, I don't think we've asked for the curriculum to be shared with us in any way.
Okay.
So whether it would be or wouldn't be, I don't know, but that hasn't been something we've asked for.
Okay. I would make a recommendation that we should ask for it, that may or may not influence someone's decision-making as to whether they felt like it was appropriate or not.
My only question of that would be, we're not here to assess any curriculum. Right.
Well, it's interesting. So, but I don't know that we can if one of the main criticisms, and I believe that one of the main criticisms of the program is anti-LGBTQ plus and anti-divorced parents, and taking students during the school day, and maybe this is just one of the things that is my criticisms and that I've heard, and I don't want to go forward with it as a criticism if it's not true, right? Like, I want to validate, is this accurate? Is my understanding accurate? That when you take students during a school day and you remove them from their school and you potentially teach them ideas that are anti-LGBTQ plus, are anti-divorced parents, and then you send them back into the school environment, that occurring within a standard school day arguably legitimizes those teachings in a way that could and likely would negatively impact the classroom environment, where we are a public school and not only tolerant but welcoming and accept people as they are.
So I don't disagree with any of that.
Okay.
I just don't know that from a policy standpoint. I don't know if we can take that into consideration. That's my concern. So I just don't know that. Like, this is about, this policy, whatever the organization is. So
I think I understand what you're saying. The policy would be inexistent or not in existence. We wouldn't take that into consideration as to whether something fell under the policy. So I am not proposing that we use it as a means to evaluate something, whether or not something can fall under the policy.
Okay.
I'm using it to evaluate whether or not I feel like the policy is being used in the wrong manner, and in a manner that is damaging to our welcoming school environment, and therefore would be potentially a reason to get rid of the policy. Does that make more sense?
it does make sense.
Okay. So, Dr. Bowers, I would like to make the request that we request the curriculum. I don't want to make a decision based upon hearsay of something that's included in a curriculum if it's not in the curriculum. So I would rather that we are as fully informed as we can when we have this discussion at the board. Okay. Is there anything else that you think would be helpful? And obviously we can have this discussion tonight. We're not going to have the discussion tonight,
Right.
but we will talk about planning for the discussion,
Yeah.
and ask our fellow board members if there's anything else that they feel like would be helpful to evaluate the situation in front of us,
Yeah.
before us.
I mean, I think we talk about what our policy looks like now, what we request of or require, what our policy requires of any organization that wants to utilize our policy, and what steps we've taken to make sure to ensure that that organization, whatever it is complying with the policy. I think we had that discussion, because
Okay.
I don't think
Like liability.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly. That discussion to me has not been had in the, we have
Public
got
facing.
guidance, right?
Mhm.
As a policy committee. And I feel like it's important to share that information.
I agree.
So that's one. I do think it's also important to share the different options, right? Or what districts have done, and not to compare, obviously, we need to think about Worthington and what's best for Worthington. But just to get some guidance and some just parameters and get a full picture of what's happening.
Meaning that we can share with our peers, we have a number of paths in front of us, so that everyone can think about this between now and our next substantive meeting, when we will talk about it in more detail.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep, I agree with that.
I have to look at my notes.
And those number of paths being, we can revoke the policy, we can leave the policy intact, we can leave the policy intact and just wait until we see what happens with our state legislature this fall. If we do that and we as a board feel like we want to make a statement as to what we approve and what we don't approve, or what we support, like obviously we don't support curriculum that is anti-LGBTQ plus, or is discriminating against any students or any form of families, that we obviously have the ability to do that while we're waiting to see what our state legislature does. Anything else I'm missing there?
So just from my perspective, pointing out parts of the policy. So, there are districts that have kept the policy as is, right? There are districts that never adopted the policy because it's an optional policy. You have districts that have adopted additional boundaries to ensure student safety. And then you have districts that have rescinded the policy years ago and districts that have done it more recently, right? And so I guess my thing would be laying out those things, and if there are something that we want to add to our policy, adding that to an option of like, do we want to make sure, how do we put in policy, or if we decide to put in policy, making sure that staff isn't impacted, because our policy says we're not to use school resources, right? And so just making sure that communication stays between whatever organization and parent or guardian, and that the school is not involved in that way. So discussing boundaries, guidelines in that sense, and how, whether we need to add that to policy or administrative guidelines, or leave it as is. I mean, but I do think that all of those options should be discussed as a full board.
I agree with you.
Forward.
Okay.
And then I haven't had a chance to look at what Tracy gave us. So just so I don't usually talk to the but just so you know, like when we get policy recommendations from our policy agency, they give us the policy recommendation, and usually there are options that we as an entire board can decide whether or not to adopt. And so we were given the original template for this policy as it was introduced in 2016. And so I actually just haven't had a chance to look at that. So that will be something perhaps that we give to the entire board so that they can look at it or not.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Certainly we can. In this case, the policy template, something that Worthington did not choose when it was adopted in 2017 is on here. And so that is that high school students could get credit if they were participating in a religious release time program that met specific criteria. So Worthington did not allow that. Obviously we could share that with the whole board. I would be hard pressed to believe that we would make a different decision today than was made back in 2017 as far as that goes.
I just, more so for an education standpoint, I had a learning curve coming into policy and not knowing even what that looks like initially. And sometimes as a whole board, we see the final, like what we've combed through. And I think that when we're taking time to evaluate an entire policy, it would be helpful just to see how it was and where, for next steps. That would be it.
So the two that you shared with us, Tracy, one is how it's presented by Neola, and the second is how it currently exists in our policy, correct? I will just say that I note it says here, no solicitation for attendance at religious instruction shall be permitted on district premises. Yet we received contrary guidance from council when we're offering that to others. So I think we need to revisit that issue and align our policy with council from guidance from our council, and figure out if we need to change our practice and or if we need to modify our policy. Okay. Okay. So we'll share tonight then during the full board meeting an update. We'll share that we are requesting a curriculum because of the things we've heard about the curriculum. But again, I don't want to make a decision based on hearsay and would rather see it if it's made available. We'll share the changes that we've recently enacted related to waivers of liability so that it's compliant with what's required by the state. We'll share our options for moving forward and then open it up to and these two versions, and then open it up to anything else people feel like they might need, any additional information that might be needed in order to have a thoughtful, substantive conversation about it.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. Anything else, Dr. Bowers?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that we want to make clear is, let's say we have that discussion and then we set a time at another board meeting to have further discussion. We would also want to make clear that at some point, like that further discussion is not a first reading of a new policy. So that would
Correct.
if we talk about it tonight, let's say we come back on November 13th and have a larger discussion when all 5 board members are present, then potentially whatever comes out of that, if there's a policy change, would come back November 28th for a first reading, whatever the December board meeting for a second reading before something changes. So there is a process and a timeline of a first reading, second reading. None of these discussions would count as first reading, second reading. So I guess you just want to spell that out for.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, we don't know what's going to be recommended, so how could we possibly have a first reading of anything at the next meeting?
Right. Correct. And even, I mean, I've seen it where it could come back to the policy committee.
100%.
Right.
Yes.
Where it goes back to the full board to work through the policy to recommend to the entire board. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there could be that piece too. So no, it's a conversation. Again, we haven't had it.
Right.
So I just think it's important, given how we address any concern. And when people are expressing a concern about a policy or expressing interest in a policy, I think it's our responsibility to look at it,
100%.
just ask questions.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I think we're aligned.
Okay.
That brings us to item number 3, which is just approval of minutes. I'll make a motion to approve our minutes.
Second.
And then we can vote on it.
Mrs. Hudson?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
I know it's a silly formality, isn't it? But we go through it. It's all good. And then I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yeah.
Mrs. Hudson?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
All right. Thanks for the time this evening, you guys.
Thank you.